Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Water Ambassador Program. The Water Ambassador Program is a partnership program between Martin County and the University of Florida, IFAS Extension, and Florida Sea Grant. It is an adult education program designed to address stormwater pollution, as well as water quality, and all of the projects that are being done in Martin County and the broader Treasure Coast region to address stormwater and water quality. We have just a handful of presentations left for our 2026 webinar series, starting with today. And then we have two webinars coming up in September to close this out. So the water science communication problem with Dr. Sadie Hundemeyer from University of Florida, as well as the Lagoon Drift Citizen Science Project from the Ngari Foundation. We are also excited to announce that we have our next field trip. So, those of you, I think maybe 2 months ago, we had Florida Lake Watch program present to the water ambassadors about the Lake Watch Citizen Science Water Monitoring Program and how that data is being used for statewide water quality assessments. And thanks to Vincent, we are excited to bring the Lake Watch program to Martin County. And so, as part of the Water Ambassador program, we are going to be hosting a volunteer training. So, anyone who has maybe a little bit of interest or a lot of interest in becoming a Lake Watch volunteer, we ask that you join us on Wednesday, September 9th, to get trained to be one of those volunteers. The registration link you can access on this QR code, or I will put it in the chat. The location is TBD. We are finalizing that now, but we'll update you as soon as we have final location details, but it will be within Martin County. As always, this presentation with all of our other webinars is going to be recorded and hosted on the UF IFAS Martin County YouTube page. We will also put that link in the chat for you all. And we ask that you use the chat feature for all of your questions. Type them as they come to you, and we will hold off to the end of the presentation to address all questions in the order in which they come in. And with that, I am really excited to present our webinar topic for today and our speaker, Heather Stapleton, who's going to be talking about her own unique personal journey on My Plastic Diet. Heather is a community engagement coordinator with the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program, where she brings energy, heart, and humor to inspiring locals to protect and heal the lagoon, and I can confirm that. Heather holds degrees in environmental studies, political science, and French from Indiana University. She spent 3 years in Benin, West Africa as a Peace Corps volunteer working in environmental education, girls' empowerment, reforestation, and gardening. And also spent 16 years as an educational director at the Environmental Learning Center, followed by roles at the Vero Beach Heritage Center and Indian River Citrus Museum. Off the clock, when she isn't trying to cut plastic out of her diet, Heather gardens, sings in choir, bakes award-winning gluten-free treats, and makes homemade fizzy drinks, hates folding laundry, and believes that the world could use more compost, more kindness, and a little less waste. So with that, which was probably the best bio I've read in like the 5 years that we've been doing this, I'm excited to introduce Heather, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you, Heather.
Thank, thank you. Okay, let's see. Share my screen. Okay. Oop. Everybody see what I'm hoping that you're seeing my presentation?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Um, I have to say, this all started thanks to a couple at my church had given up plastic one year for Lent. And it's not a big tradition of mine to observe Lent, but I thought, well, that's an interesting challenge. I wonder if I might also be able to do that. And that coupled with several of the other experiences, which I'm going to highlight in here, led me to think about a plastic diet. And so initially, for it was about 3.5 months, I tried my darndest not to buy any plastic at all. I used plastic that was already, in my kitchen, in my bathroom, things like that, but I didn't buy any new plastic as best as I could. I had a couple instances, medical things where I absolutely had to. But in 3.5 months, I was able to reduce my plastic use to the size of a shoebox. And that got me really excited. And I'm not that it was easy, but with each new habit that I was able to adopt, I just thought, wow, this is kind of cool. And one of my best friends said, "Hey, could you turn this into a presentation?" And I had never considered making this into any kind of presentation. I thought it was just something I was kind of doing for myself. And I was just talking with Lisa and Vincent. By the time this calendar year is up, I will have given this particular presentation 28 times now. So it's exciting, and I'm glad to be here. Thanks for being here with us. I know that lunch hours are important and sacred, and I appreciate that everybody has spent the time today to learn about what maybe you can do a little bit better. Um, hmm. Okay. So the disclaimer, there really is no such thing as plastic free. There's really no such thing as perfect. And so I just want folks to know I try not to even use the phrase plastic free. There is an organization, an international organization based out of Australia, and they call themselves Plastic Free July, but really it's just a goal. And I well understand that I am not plastic free. However, single stream recycling, once they decided to replace our tubs with the carts and allowed us just to put everything into those carts, the whole goal of that was to increase our recycling. But what we found, particularly with plastic, is that less and less is truly being recycled, even though the process is supposed to be easier for us end users. In fact, globally, only 9% of plastic is recycled, and we have discovered that locally, it's even less than that. So, what happens to the rest of it? Well, the remainder is burned, buried, or as we are all aware, living on the coasts becomes litter. You may have seen the most recent report from Keep America Beautiful, which documented a dramatic decrease in litter, except along the coasts, where litter has actually increased. So, for whatever reason, I didn't really go into, delve into that part, but we well know that living near and on the coast, we have more litter than most. Oh, that almost rhymed. And then plastic is about 18.5% of the total municipal solid waste in the United States. And our landfills for the Treasure Coast region really follow that statistic pretty closely. So the deal is we keep making and buying more plastic while actually recycling less and less of it. So one of the things that kind of got me started on this plastic diet was my multiple trips to the MRF. And I don't expect that you can read everything on this diagram. It's quite small, but this diagram does just kind of show you what's happening, with the process. And it is a mixture of machines, humans, and technology. And so this place is called the MRF, the Material Recovery Facilities. Um, Indian River County, St. Lucie County, Martin County, we all of our recycling goes to the MRF in St. Lucie County. In Brevard County, everyone except for the city of Palm Bay goes to a different MRF. It's a MRF in Cocoa Beach. In the city of Palm Bay, if we have any folks from the Space Coast joining us, their recycling also goes to the one in St. Lucie County. And once at this MRF, this is where everything gets separated. And it's like this Rube Goldbergian contraption where you literally have magnets and puffs of air and optical sorters and all of these more old-fashioned cogs and wheels, and it's extremely loud. And then you have the human element in there as well. And the point there is to not only separate out what the recyclers, we have mushed all together, they separate all of those out and eventually bale them up into like materials where they can be sold for to actually be recycled and turned into new products. And so one of the big problems with recycling is if we are not purchasing things made out of recycled materials, that market starts to decrease in value. And that's when recycling becomes sort of this economic conundrum. If is it really worth sending out the trucks, and is it really worth all of this human labor? Because the value of those materials drops if we are not using recycled materials. The big standout currently is cardboard. Because we all love to order so many things online, cardboard is currently at an all-time high for recycling. But that diagram is just, it's very sterile. And let me show you, if you've never been, let me show you what you see. So when I arrived at the St. Lucie MRF, I was greeted by this just complete craziness. What happens if there's a gust of wind? What happens, if there's rain? All of those materials in the background there are not well contained, unfortunately. And then when you do get to the portions that are well contained, you still have all of these strange smells. And I don't know if you can see the ground there, strange mystery liquids seeping out from some of these bins. And then you get inside the belly of the beast. And this is where I just became really overwhelmed. Many people had a very opposite reaction. Many people saw these and thought, wow, how efficient. We're really taking care of our trash, which is definitely one viewpoint. My viewpoint was just one of being completely overwhelmed by everything contained within. And I just felt like the more we viewed and toured the MRF, I just felt this sinking feeling in my heart like I cannot believe that only 3 counties and one city produce this much, this regularly. It was quite surprising to me. I was definitely one of the people who said, "Oh, we should definitely recycle," and you know, I now understand how flawed the recycling process is. And then in the background there on that picture on the right, just to show you, those are baled up. I think that's aluminum, to show you just how tall those stacks really are. You can kind of see them in the middle picture, but on the far right photograph, you can see how tall those bales become. And so this just requires enormous amounts of human input to sort through all of this stuff. And it's dangerous. You'll see these people have on masks, they have on hard hats. The day we were there, um, that they had retrieved an electric paint sprayer. They said that golf balls are very common, fire extinguishers. And you might think, why in the world does that person have on a headlamp? Well, that's because when the machinery becomes all clogged up, they actually put on mountain climbing gear and get in those spots in order to retrieve and undo the clogs. And then the outside really wasn't all that much better. You can kind of see here, just I took 2 quick videos. The back of the MRFs in St. Lucie County, and in particular, this area was right next to a canal. And we all know where those canals eventually lead. And so I found this just to be also another overwhelming aspect. All this stuff just everywhere outside. So, as much good as we're trying to do by recycling, look at all of this thoughtless litter. But the thing is, the exterior needn't be thoughtless. So, this is to contrast MRF up in Brevard County. And on the picture on the right, or the video on the right, you can actually see there's even a family of sandhill cranes there, just beyond the fence. So, in one instance, just beyond the border, we had a canal with all kinds of litter going into it. And in this other instance, there were actually some wildlife, and you can see it's pretty clean. I'm not going to say there was absolutely no litter. You can see a few pieces there on the left, but quite a contrast between my other experience. Now, having said that, the inside of the Brevard County MRF was just as overwhelming as the St. Lucie County MRF. My only point in showing these videos is that to show that it is possible with a thoughtful design, it is possible to prevent some of that litter. So, a big problem with why recycling is so flawed is because of us, because of the way we use our recycling carts. One of the big problems is we do something, and I am just as guilty as everyone else, where I hope that something is recycling. And so rather than doing the work to find out, I just think, oh, it's plastic, and I know plastic is recyclable. I'll just chuck it in the bin. And so that causes problems. It's the chucking of these other items in the bin that then causes the MRF to have to stop its processes. The people get in and clean it all out. And what happens is every time that the MRF has to shut down, the trucks are still coming, they're still making deliveries. And so all of those items on the exterior, when I told you I was welcomed by all this stuff, that was all the stuff that the MRF had not yet processed due to a shutdown. So the MRF shuts down, the trucks keep arriving, they keep dumping off our materials until eventually there's absolutely no place to put more material and they end up going to the landfill. So the phrase is when in doubt, throw it out. So if you absolutely do not know if something is recyclable or not, and you don't have the time to look it up, then don't place it in your recycling bin because that wish cycling actually causes more problems. And so it's really important to educate ourselves, especially those of us who spend part of our year elsewhere or those of us who grew up elsewhere. Different locations can have very different ways that they do recycling. And it's just important to know the differences. It's also important to keep yourself kind of in the know because sometimes things change. So, for example, the St. Lucie County MRF used to take aluminum foil. And it wasn't until we got our new bins, and I live in Indian River County. We got new recycling bins about a year or two ago. And I looked at the new sticker on top, and aluminum foil was no longer on there. So I called up my friend, Sue Flack, who's with the Solid Waste Disposal District. And I said, was there some kind of change? Aluminum is no longer on the sticker on my bin. And she said, oh, Heather, we haven't recycled aluminum for like 8 years. So I was wish cycling. I'd been thinking that aluminum foil was the way to go and throwing that in my recycling cart for quite some time. So really, it's all about reducing and reusing. So today, I don't really want to get into what is recyclable and what is not recyclable. I would rather focus our time on reducing and reusing. And then, yes, when it comes time to recycle, make sure you're doing it absolutely right. And when I say right, here's an example. There has been a lot of back and forth about caps. Some places say yes, some places say no. But here's the deal. If you're going to recycle your caps, you absolutely must put them on the bottle. So Martin County, St. Lucie County, Indian River County, our recycling all goes to the same place. And we can include caps, but we need to make sure that they are tightly on that bottle because look what happens. Was everywhere. Actually, I think this particular picture came from the Cocoa MRF, but you can see caps cause a problem. So yes, caps are recyclable. However, they must be attached to the container. And hopefully, folks well understand that propane tanks are not recyclable. This is the amount of propane tanks in 6 months that had been collected at the Coco Murph. You can imagine how much danger something like this might cause if it made it through the line and into the Murph. I can't even imagine. That job is extremely dangerous as is. And then we start adding things like this to that process, and that's just another overwhelming mess, in my opinion. And then because recycling is so flawed in the United States, I could not resist this next picture. That is an American flag that got bundled up in a cube of plastic. So all of that is supposedly, it's been through the human sorting. It's been through the Rube Goldberg contraption. And yet still that American flag made it into one of the bales of plastic recycling. And I thought, oh, that's like something you'd see in National Geographic. So I'll speak to Indian River County just because that's where I live and that's where I do know the most. But these statistics are very similar pretty much throughout most of Florida. So in Indian River County, you can see how much trash we are throwing out versus how much we are recycling versus how much potentially could be recycled but is not making its way into the MRF. And that could be one of those instances where the MRF had to temporarily shut down. And I worked so hard to sort all my recycling properly, but because a neighbor was wish cycling, it meant that my batch also potentially went to the landfill. And you can see nationwide the statistics on what is in our landfills. And what is particularly surprising to me is that 24% of landfills is food. Yet where I live in Indian River County, 1 in 4 children don't get enough food. That's a pretty perverse statistic. And in fact, in the United States, we waste massive amounts of food going to the landfill. And food in particular is a huge producer of methane emissions, which are a much more powerful greenhouse gas than is carbon dioxide. So in Indian River County, our first cell in our landfill closed quite some time ago. Our second cell opened up in 2024. The life expectancy was 10 years. It only made it 5.5 years. And we do have room for 2 more cells in Indian River County. However, the thought is that sometime between 2050 and 2060, our landfill will likely close, meaning we won't have a physical space in this county for trash to go. And those kind of statistics are very similar for other landfills as well. And of course, not only are we spending money on landfills, not and space on landfills, we have other impacts as well. And microplastics are becoming such a huge topic right now. I feel like weekly we're learning something new about microplastics. And we well know that animals can mistake plastic debris for food. It can block their digestive systems, and so they get a false sense of full and they don't eat and they actually starve to death, otherwise perfectly healthy. It's not the animal isn't necessarily tangled up in the plastic, but it's causing that blockage. And then of course we have seen the entanglement as well. That's a huge issue where we are, especially the Indian River Lagoon and monofilament. Definitely a big problem. And I have seen many birds who have ended up dying because they get a piece of monofilament on their foot, their leg. They roost overnight. That monofilament blows around in the wind, gets tangled up in the trees, and when the bird tries to leave in the morning, the bird actually ends up accidentally hanging itself. And we're learning more and more, unfortunately, with microplastics in particular, just because of the way our wastewater treatment systems work, that these microplastics become carriers not only for harmful chemicals, but also bacteria and viruses. And so, microplastics in animals can cause all kinds of secondary issues that's not related to the physicality of the microplastic itself. And so, how does that impact the Indian River Lagoon? Well, we well know that the water column, the sediments, and the animals living in the Indian River Lagoon are heavily polluted with microplastics, and it transfers up the food web. So it that is a bioaccumulation of not only again the physical components of microplastics, but all of the other chemicals, viruses, and bacteria that are carried by those microplastics. And so University of Central Florida has found particularly alarming information regarding microplastics in the oysters and in our water column. And Orca has also found that 71% of the fish that we would eat, so Orca targets just the fish that humans could possibly eat in the lagoon. So they're not checking out the other species, but of the fish that we would typically eat, 71% of them have microplastics in their stomachs and 60% of the tissue that we would eat of fish. And don't think that humans are escaping, the effects of microplastics. So not only do microplastics affect wildlife, but pretty much every single part of our body, we have now found microplastics, including in newborns who've never even had the opportunity to eat any of their own food. They have also been found with microplastics in their body. We know that microplastics can cross that blood-brain barrier, and I find particularly concerning that the concentrations of microplastics in cadaver brains rose by almost 50% in a mere 8 years. So, all of that depressing information is what led me to really do this plastic diet. I was overwhelmed by the MRF. I already knew about wildlife encounters with litter. 3 years ago, I did not really know much about human plastic, or excuse me, microplastics in humans. And so after learning all of this stuff, I decided, okay, well, what can we do about this? And how hard will it be to do these things? So earlier on the call, I mentioned that a couple in my church had started their own plastic diet, although they didn't call it that at the time. So finding like-minded people was really important to me. I didn't want to do this, in a bubble. I started very small and, I already did lots of things. Like I was already using a reusable straw instead of a single-use plastic straw. You heard in my bio, I am obsessed with fizzy beverages. So I had been using a carbonator at home for many, many years. So I had already done a few of the behaviors and so I knew things were possible. And so I decided to try more. And definitely staying consistent makes it a habit, just like when we try to go on a caloric diet. The more we stick with something, the easier it becomes. And it really is not just about motivation. It's about discipline. So just like exercise and diet, motivation will only get you so far. You do have to become somewhat disciplined. And then for me, I found that my Facebook page never really had a point to it. But now I started sharing what was working on social media, and it was garnering all kinds of really interesting conversations. So that was exciting for me. And you just kind of have to be willing to talk about it, especially while shopping. So when I was doing specific behaviors, for example, I'll show you one of those in a minute. I stopped going to self checkout and started going to the line with the cashier just because I knew it would start a conversation. So I started using, when I go to the deli, I started using aluminum containers. Now, these do have plastic snap lids, but I started using those for cheese and meats. And I would go through the line, and the cashier would say, "What even is this? Do we even sell this here?" I knew I needed to try aluminum instead of glass because I could see someone accidentally dropping that container. I could see myself ruining it for all future people who wanted to try this. So I specifically chose aluminum. And then being honest about setbacks and challenges. I have been the victim of greenwashing. That's when a company does false advertising to make you think that they are more environmentally friendly than they really are. And then you get home and you start really delving into, some online sources and you find, oh my gosh, I was definitely hoodwinked on that one. And there are definitely some challenges for sure. So I showed you the example already of what works for me, taking those reusable containers to the deli and butcher counter. I don't eat a lot of meat, but I do love cheese, and so this was one way to start reducing my plastic. Probably many of you already take reusable mugs and tumblers to coffee shops. In my experience, it's easier with locally owned coffee shops. Um, and during COVID, I think we all became a little bit of germaphobes. And so some coffee shops, they don't want to take my tumbler back behind the counter, but they craft my drink and then they just pour it directly into my tumbler right on the counter. They don't ever touch my cup. My cup never goes back behind, so there's no potential, they don't know me. Maybe I don't wash my cup properly. We've eliminated all of that worry. I am obsessed with my soda stream. Um, I think Rosemary Badger is on the call. She knows I love to make homemade sodas. It's so much fun. You can do all kinds of flavors. I don't buy the pre-made flavors. Instead, I'll like juice a cucumber and put some honey and cucumber, and even I've made cilantro syrup and all kinds of interesting things. It's so much fun. If you have a farmer's market nearby or specialty counters, they also seem to be a little bit more willing to indulge your, environmental craziness. For me, a big one also was laundry detergent. I had been using powders, but actually now I use a compressed tablet. But laundry detergent, shampoo and conditioner bars, tooth powder, these are all just ways to reduce plastic. Now, I will admit my tooth powder, it comes in a glass container, but it has a plastic lid, so that is unfortunate. I also have some toothpaste tablets and the packaging on those was really interesting. It was just two cardboard pieces that fit together quite nicely. Cloth napkins, therefore, they're not packaged up in plastic. I'm a big fan of reusable straws. Trying to avoid prepackaged snacks. Oh my gosh, that you will almost never find unless you are perfectly content never eating a pretzel, a potato chip, a peanut. It is really hard snacks. I also found that I just had to be willing to try new things, which is hard for me. If I find a brand that I like, I like the way it tastes or I like the way that it functions, I'm not the kind of person to try something new just because I see something new. However, when trying this plastic diet, I had to be much more willing to try that. And then a big one, I don't really have much grass at all. I have a crazy, mostly native yard. But because my strip of grass out front is so small, my lawn guys were using a weed trimmer. Well, where do you think all that plastic line goes? The only reason plastic line in our weed trimmers need to be replaced is because it is literally degrading right before our eyes. And all of that plastic goes straight into the environment. So that was a big change. I'm particularly curious, and I can't see the chat right now, but I would love if you have any really interesting strategies, if you could type those in the Q&A for me. Lisa is going to give me all of the results of the Q&A. I'm always looking for new ways to do a little bit better, and I would love for you guys to see what your co-audience members are already doing. I've learned some really interesting things from other people when I do this in person. And also when I do this in person, this show and tell portion is much more significant. So if you need a guest speaker, I would love to bring my bags upon bags of show and tell on how we make a plastic diet work. But I also really want to hear about your ideas. The more unhinged, the better. because we all have plenty of room for improvement. So, yes, I've been working pretty diligently at this, but like I said in that very first slide, I'm nowhere near perfect. I am not plastic free. I'm just using less and less plastic. Now, if you are in Martin County, you actually have a zero waste shop called One World Zero Waste. Can't recommend it enough. Just try it out. It's actually where I discovered a shampoo bar that I really like. Not all shampoo bars are created equal, and I don't have super long hair, but I do have longish hair. And so, not all products will work the same for everyone. And so, there is a little bit of experimentation involved. And I found that at One World Zero Waste, I got some great ideas, but it's not near me. I live in Vero Beach, and that would just be a crazy long trip. My other challenge is trash bags. Yeah, there are paper trash bags that exist. They're quite expensive. Skincare, dish soap, cleaning products, as you can imagine, finding those alternatives is not only difficult, but it can definitely be more expensive. And so not everyone will be able to adopt the same new behaviors or the same products as everyone else because that expense can certainly be a barrier. I have celiac and I try to eat organic. So being plastic free and organic and gluten free, forget it, you're out of luck. Because bulk bins won't work for those of us who have celiac. Most bulk bins state that there is a chance that the items in that bin have been cross contaminated because they were processed in the same facility that processes wheat. So I love Sprouts grocery store. I think they don't do a great job, but still they do the best job at providing lots of produce that's not packaged up in plastic. And they have an amazing blow your mind set of bulk bins. I mean, you can get everything from sugar to beans to nuts to candy in those things. However, every single one of those bins does have a note that says maybe cross-contaminated with wheat. Dairy, pretty challenging for me and what's available to me. When you go out to eat or when you go to a bar, remembering to say no straws, no stirs right away, which almost feels a little rude because you want to greet them and thank them um, but trying to remember to say no straw, please. It's hard. And greenwashing is particularly hard to spot. Um, Cans are wrapped in plastic. Laundry detergent sheets and pods were kind of all the rage, but most of them are put together with polyvinyl alcohol, which is a kind of plastic. And our laundry is already a huge source of microplastics. In fact, for households, laundry is our biggest contributor to microplastics. And so, if you were talked into trying laundry sheets, I would like to talk you out of that and convince you to try the compressed tablets. There's no plastic in those compressed tablets. Now, recently online, I did learn about a new laundry sheet, and it is kind of glued together. I think it was with an algae or something like that. I don't remember precisely, but the polyvinyl alcohol is what holds everything together. And in a compressed tablet, whether that's a laundry detergent or a cleaning supply, there are no plastic used compressing those tablets together. And of course, online shopping and shipping is very difficult to try to reduce your plastic use. There are some great online brands, Etsy, which is out of Canada, or Thrive Market. They do a pretty good job of reducing their plastic. And even Amazon has gotten a little bit better with plastics. I'm trying to wean myself off of online shopping and shipping just for many reasons, but it's so darn convenient, isn't it? Medicines, you cannot put medicine bottles in your single stream recycling. They're too small. It's not that they can't be recycled, it's just that the MRF can't properly process them in most instances. It will just end up on the MRF floor, much like that pile of caps that I showed you. And I am not a very good advocate. I love to educate. I love to have discussions with people. I love to learn from other people, but I am not the best at being politically active. And one thing that I would like to improve about myself is advocating for what is known as extended producer responsibility laws. So we need to make the companies do better. If our only choices of products come with way too much plastic, then that makes it difficult for consumers to have the right choices, make the right choices, because the right choices might not even be available. And so the only ones that can change that are the producers. And so there are big stories. I encourage you to go online and look at this, the story of stuff, the story of plastic, how Coke killed the refillable bottle. All very interesting sources of information about producing plastics. And the list goes on. This is not, an exhaustive list, but you get it. One day I thought I was doing so great, buying my items in cans and cardboard boxes. And then I realized every single pallet of goods is shrink wrapped in plastic. So even if you think that your shopping trip was plastic free, it likely was not. And there are some very surprising sources of plastic. I talked about the string trimmer already, but even when we drive, tire wear is a big source of microplastics. And so we need to be careful with, braking and accelerating and keeping our tires properly inflated, because tires are a big contributor to microplastics. And of course, everywhere we drive around and near the Indian River Lagoon, stormwater runoff is just going to wash that right in that tire dust right into our waterways. So keep your tires at the manufacturer recommended PSI. Drive smoothly, so less braking and acceleration. When practical, avoid rough roads. That is not always doable. And then we really need to replace excessively worn tires per recommendation, because worn tires start wearing down even faster. And then with laundry, like I said, laundry is household's biggest contributor of microplastics. And so every time we wash synthetic fibers, they release plastics, especially if you wash in hot water. And then we use our dryers as well. So that's just another chance for microplastics. Microplastics do become airborne very easily. And so our best choices, and this is not easy. This is, again, where we could really work on some extended producer responsibility laws. Our best choices are cotton, hemp, linen, wool. Compromise solution is rayon and blends, but every time we use acrylic, fleece, polyester, we're going to be contributing to those microplastics. Now, in Europe this year, so 2026, all new washing machines manufactured in Europe must have a built-in microplastics filter on them. And we can buy them and you can put them on your washing machine aftermarket. And they're actually very successful. Anywhere from 80 to 90% of the microplastics that get released during the washing process can be filtered out by those filters. I don't have one. I've never used one. I've just started learning about them myself, but they're quite effective. And every now and then celebrate when you're able to go that extra mile. I will give a shout out to Cumberland Farms. They allow you to actually bring in a cup. And so, ta-da, I have brought in my cup with my reusable straw. When my soda stream was not available to me and I was just jonesing for some sort of fizzy beverage, rather than buy a bottled beverage, I go to Cumberland Farms because I know they allow this. And of course, shopping at farmers markets, pretty easy to, eliminate most plastic. Remember, there is likely some shrink wrapped plastic, even with farmers market finds. I mean, let's face it, nobody is growing limes in Florida. I well know that those limes, even though I bought them at a farmer's market, were not grown in Florida. So likely there's some plastic associated behind the scenes. And I recognize that I am quite fortunate that I have a friend who is a poultry farmer. And normally I help her twice a year with poultry. And normally we would shrink wrap it in plastic. But here's my birds. So my birds were not shrunk wrapped in plastic for the past 3 years now. I bring them home. I dry them really, really well. I wrap them in butcher paper, and be aware there are some butcher papers that are actually lined in plastic. So definitely at the fresh market and at Publix, their butcher paper is lined in plastic, unfortunately. So I would wrap my birds in really well in butcher paper. And then for the ones that I was going to be freezing for a long time, I also did wrap those in aluminum foil. But even the ones that I just wrapped really well in butcher paper did not get freezer burn. So the gist of all this is a plastic diet is doable. Being plastic free is probably not doable at this point in society, unfortunately. But making a plastic diet doable is all about just making adjustments, prioritizing a little bit differently, because just recycling is certainly not the answer. And every time that I do this presentation, it keeps me a little bit more accountable than I was the day before. Can you imagine finding me in the grocery store and my cart be full of single-use plastics? How embarrassing that would be for me. So every time I do this, it actually reinforces how I want to be. Inspiring others keeps me accountable. When other people share their success stories with me, I find that very moving. I'm very heartened by that. Um, Got to keep advocating for that extended producer responsibility, because at the end of the day, your choices matter, your actions make a difference, and your voice can inspire change. All right. I see lots of activity in the chat. I'm not sure if it's all of our strategies or questions, but I am ready for questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Yes, we have a lot of successes and suggestions in the chat, so I will
Yay.
definitely share that with you.
Can't
Let
wait.
me scroll up to the top and try and get to the start of the questions. Okay. Is there something inherent in the designs of the MRFs or management that are responsible for the differences in the litter seen outside?
Yes. So the Murph and Coco, they allow overtime. And so if they have to shut down the MRF to unclog cogs and wheels and what have you, and the materials start piling up outside, the one in Cocoa specifically will then pay their workers overtime. The one in St. Lucie County does not offer that option. And so the one in St. Lucie County just has all of the piled up stuff outside of the MRF itself. But remember, the biggest reasons materials pile up around the exterior of a MRF is because we are wish cycling.
Yeah. Robert provides a good note for those of us who need to dispose of a U.S. flag. Proper disposal is done at a courtesy by the Navy SEAL Museum in
Thank you.
Hutchinson Island.
And for those
Hopefully,
who might not live, close to the Navy SEAL Museum, you can contact your Veterans Affairs and veterans organizations. We have a couple of nonprofits who will also do that at no charge.
we are seeking clarification on one of your earlier slides that had the stats of waste and the $473 billion worth of food waste. What was the geographic scale for
That's
that?
the entire United States.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
I could not find a dollar statistic for any of our local landfills, but let me tell you that it is such a problem at the Indian River County landfill that the two women who are our recycling coordinators for our county actually started an ancillary nonprofit that's all about retrieving foods that might otherwise get thrown away. And so they work with a couple different grocery stores and a couple different restaurants retrieving foods, and then their nonprofit is called Treasure Coast community fridges, and they have volunteers that retrieve these foods that maybe they're nearing their expiration date, and then they take them to these anonymous food banks. You don't have to prove anything. You can come and go as you like. We have three of those in Indian River County.
Great, thank you. And those of you who are participants, you'll note that I just launched the quick 4-question evaluation poll. We appreciate your taking a couple of seconds to complete that for us while we go through the rest of the questions. Um, so Kelly asks, how can we change legislation? We have to stop Publix and the others from handing out plastic bags. Some people will just not do the right thing unless forced. Europe has had that for years.
Yes. So unfortunately, in Florida, we have nicknamed the legislation a ban on bans. So at this time, our municipalities may not enact anything stronger than state legislation. And it's considered interfering with interstate commerce. And so it's a problem that we could definitely be working on. That's the thing I'm not good at. I have to admit that's not my forte. But yeah, we need to get better at that for sure.
The next question is, do you know what the state of technology for compostable and biodegradable food wrappers is? The
A lot of
containers.
that, yes, a lot of that early material that you have heard of bioplastic, it contributes just as much microplastics. And so the idea is not to use those supposedly biodegradable plastics at all. Moreover, in a landfill, things don't really biodegrade. Maybe you've heard of a book called Garbology by William Rathie. He took a big core sample of a landfill and found food that looked almost good enough to eat and discovered it had been in that landfill for like 20 plus years because he could read a newspaper in that same sample. He could read the date on a newspaper that was near the food. So by design, landfills are not supposed to be, biodegrading. In Indian River County, we do have a commercial compost facility. It's new-ish. They are not taking anything other than food and lawn debris. And I have just tried at home some experimenting with those supposedly compostable products, and some are better than others at breaking down in an at-home compost. Many of them even say, commercial compost, not home compost. But I have found a few products that say home compostable. I think that's a little bit of greenwashing.
We have a question. It was also answered in the chat, but I'm gonna frame it anyway, just in case you want to add. So, someone asked what a good replacement for those string trimmers were, if we can offer up alternatives to municipalities and organizations. The response was that there are trimmers that use metal string, but I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
The only thing to add to that is metal string and actual metal blades. But as you can imagine, that requires a whole nother level of safety if you have a metal blade on your trimmer.
Okay. We have probably a comment that I think we're all feeling here is that, we are the choir. How do we change the minds of everyone else?
Well, invite me to anything and everything. Let's say I am still waiting to be invited to a women's group that likes to drink wine. Like, let me at them. I'll get in there. Yes, but I think with every change that you make, be willing to talk about it. So, these containers for me was what got me the most attention. So every time I shop with these, even when I'm at the deli employees will be like, "What in the heck are you doing?" And people nearby, same questions. And so I think just being willing to chat about progress that you've made, don't come across obviously as, sanctimonious. Look, there is still plenty of plastic in my house. We all have, room to grow. We all get to know better and do better. And that's all we can expect of one another. And in some instances, it is more expensive. Like, how fortunate am I that I could buy a set of these things instead of just relying on the free bag that comes with my, groceries at the grocery store. Um, yeah, so just keep inviting your friends. We just talked about this earlier. Vincent and Lisa reminded me that this will be posted on their YouTube channel. So if you have some friends that aren't so great about reducing plastics, share this YouTube channel with them.
Um, I think this is in reference to the small medicine bottles. The question is, when recycling small bottles, is it acceptable to place them inside a larger recyclable container?
Oh, now that I do not know, but I am going to look that up and I'll let Lisa and Vincent know.
Perfect. We will let you all know. Susan wants to know if you can tell us a little bit more about EPR.
Well, we don't have it in America. And they do have it in Europe. It's pretty intense in Europe. And so bottles need to, usually they need to contain a certain amount of post-consumer recycled plastic. So that creates a market for recycling. However, I will tell you that the companies that adhere to the European laws because they want to do business in Europe turn around and do even worse things in Asia and Africa because they know they can get away with it there. And so one of the big things is small selling products in the small little plastic sachets. Maybe someone doesn't have enough money to buy a big box of powdered laundry detergent, but they do have enough money to buy a little sachet. And so those companies that do the right thing are only doing the right thing because they're forced to do the right thing if they want to do business in those places. Having said all of that, those laws work. And so it would be fantastic if we had more such legislation elsewhere, not just Europe.
Thank you. We have a comment from Robert. Those in the central in IRL region says Indian River County Coastal Connection Inc. does beach and park cleanups, removing trash. They also have a number of public events and some internal cleanups, and a wrap recycling program that works with retailers.
They don't only work with retailers, they also work with my church. So at my church, we are also doing the plastic wrap recycling. Coastal Connections in Indian River County is doing amazing. They have a program called Vero Goes Zero, and it encompasses all kinds of things, and it's amazing. But wouldn't it be awesome if we didn't have the plastic to recycle in the first place? So one problem that I'm now finding at my church is it's almost like a free pass. Oh, I can get a plastic bag at the grocery store because I know the Earth Care team at church will make sure it goes to the right place to get recycled. And so my hope was that our weight of collected plastic would start going down, but it's actually gone up a little bit.
We see that a lot in social marketing studies. It's fascinating how the human
Yeah.
mind works.
It's kind of like recycling assuages one's guilt of having bought the plastic in the first place.
Yeah. Um, Nicole provides a comment, not a question, but I think it resonates probably with a lot of us on this call. So I'm going to read it. It's fairly lengthy, but
Okay.
to give you some time to maybe respond.
Yeah.
It's hard not to get discouraged. I tried laundry sheets because they came delivered in paper, and now it turns out that there's plastic in that too. I brought a travel bug in Starbucks. This happened to me as well. For them just to make the drink, pour it into a plastic cup, and then pour it into my reusable cup. Paper products wrapped in plastic for shipping, bubble wrap, etc. I'm not trying to make excuses not to try, but it is such a burden to put saving the planet on the consumer instead of the industries that are ultimately shifting the blame onto us. And you're talking about that right now, so thank you. This isn't really a question, just mentally fatigued from the effort.
Oh, 100%. So first of all, my nickname is Debbie Downer, not just Heather Stapleton, but pretty much everywhere I go, I get to be called Debbie Downer. Um, I'm okay with that, and I can treat that lightheartedly and funny, but I do understand the mental fatigue issue. And so that's why it is so important to have a support group. And so I did not do this by myself in a vacuum. I happen to have a team of people at my church with whom I am quite close. So, and we are the Earth Care team at my church, so that was helpful. I have a lot of friends in my life who are also trying to do better. And whenever we find a new resource, we share it with one another. If, for example, I'm going to be down in Martin County or even southern St. Lucie County for any reason, I will try my best to stop by One World Zero Waste, the zero waste shop. We also
Heather,
do
I
have
live
a
right there. Just let me know what you want. We'll make it happen.
okay, awesome. Yes. I have toyed with the idea with some friends of mine of starting a zero waste shop up this way. I have to tell you though, I don't have an entrepreneurial bone in my body, so I'm not sure how that would happen. But I understand the fatigue and I understand, and all I can suggest to you is try one thing, get really good at that one thing, and then move on from there. And if you need some help, email me. I promise I'll be your support group. If you don't have a plastic free support group, I want to be that person for you.
Thank you. We are at 1 o'clock, so I do want to respect everyone's time. We also have a lot more comments and questions in the chat. Heather, I don't know if you're willing to stay on
I
for
I
those.
can yeah, I can stay for a bit.
Okay, let us know when you need to go. But for
Okay.
those of you who do have to go, thank you so much for joining us for My Plastic Diet. We hope that you will join us in September for our two final webinars for 2026. And yeah, thanks again for joining us. So the next question has to do with the large plastic bag sort of drop-off locations outside the big box, Publix
Mhm.
and Walmart and stuff.
Mhm.
Do you know how effective this is in encouraging plastic recycling or in general in reducing plastic pollution?
Um, Publix has their own MRF, which is interesting to me, and I'm dying to get into that one, but I have not been able to figure out how to tour the Publix MRF. My worry with the big bins outside of stores is that they're not picked through carefully enough. I have seen many times where people are just rushing to get into the store and they cross-contaminate because in my experience, many of those containers look exactly the same. The one for recycling looks just like the trash. The one for plastic recycling looks just like the one for cardboard. And so I don't know for sure, but I surmise that there's a lot of cross-contamination going on in with those containers.
Okay, thank you. Um, some more sort of informational sources. St. Lucie County has a special plastic bag recycling program, and that there are drop-off locations around the county, including some libraries, the Oxbow Eco Center, etc. An additional flag source is Paramount Pawn. Mm, the stringers, in response to the grass trimmers, you can
Hmm.
add plant buffer zones. It won't eliminate the stringers, but will help to reduce the string pieces
That's a
entering the waterways. We have a specific question of, can this be shared on Facebook or email? Your presentation.
Yeah, so if this is being recorded and it will be on YouTube, and Lisa, I think you're going to remind folks
I
about
absolutely will.
the YouTube channel, so please share away.
Okay, great. Um, I think a lot of different sort of comments and recommendations, but overall, thank you so much for an inspiring, great program, and people got a lot out of this. So thank
Yay.
you so much, Heather, and I will look forward to sharing the chat with you.
Everyone, if you need to email me, feel free. It's I as what was my email somewhere in the chat, maybe?
We will put it in the chat, or you
Okay.
can put it in the chat.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. I haven't been monitoring the chat.
Um, and ooh, we have one last question that just came
Yes.
in. Garbage bags.
Oh
And
yeah, that's one of the things I still have a huge problem with. I did find garbage bags made from recycled plastic. And so that is what I purchased most recently. I don't have a lot of garbage. I do think it's important that we unfortunately bag our garbage up. I know some people have tried just throwing loose garbage in the can, but again, this is not proven, but I surmise that when we do that, a lot of it ends up as litter falling out of dump trucks and things. I've seen this happen with recycling, so I only assume that it could happen with trash as well. So there is a brand called Who Gives a Crap that makes recycle trash bags out of recycled plastic. There are paper bags available. I have found them to be pretty expensive.
And Irene adds that if you have dogs or cats, their food bags can be used as trash
Oh yeah,
bags.
like bread bags and
Mhm.
cereal bags and yeah, for sure. Great idea.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. Again, thank you for joining us and for staying with us for an extra 6 minutes. Obviously, an engaging topic. So
Could I comment on the last comment that just came in now that my comment
please
is
do.
open?
Yes.
Please remember that things don't really compost in a landfill. Things don't really break down. So I too have been the victim many times of greenwashing of compostable products, whether it's compostable packaging or compostable trash bags. They're not the answer. And in fact, if it is a compostable plastic, they still contribute to the microplastics problem.
Great. Thank you for catching that. All right, everyone. Take care, and hopefully we'll see you in September.
Thank you so
And
much.
we expect to have the recording up within the week. So
Awesome.
keep an
Thanks
eye
for the invitation.
out.
Thanks, everybody.